Ici, restez.
Tu for DBR, ja?
You get in here with the picture.
Also ich meine, so habe ich jetzt schon mal da.
How are you?
Yeah.
Oh yes, the book.
The book. 1, 2, 3.
I'd like to welcome Whitney Harris and his wife very cordially indeed.
Mit Ihnen in dreifacher Hinsicht etwas Besonderes. Der Besuch von Whitney Harris ist das eine. Wir sind sehr glücklich, dass er zu diesem Gespräch bei uns ist. Wir sind gespannt, seine authentischen Äußerungen zu hören.
Ladies and gentlemen, today is of threefold importance. One point is the visit by Whitney Harris. We're very happy to have him here and address us today. And we're all very excited to hear his authentic ideas and remembrances.
Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, ich darf nun das Wort an Herrn Teubrich vom Dokumentationszentrum Nürnberg übergeben. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Dr. Franke. Ladies and gentlemen, as director of the Documentation Center, I would like to give you a very warm welcome as well. Please allow me to concentrate my introducing greetings, namely and representative unto some persons who were testimonies of Germany's dark age themselves. Arno Hamburger, head of Nuremberg's Jewish community, Franz Rosenbach and Erich Schneeberger, the Association of Sinti and Roma, and further Dr. Oskar Schneider, our Speaker of the Board of Trustees, for both the Documentation Center and the coming Memoriam Nuremberg Trials. With only short time to prepare, this is quite an improvisational event. Therefore, I would like to express my thanks for making this evening possible to Professor Christoph Safferling, as he initiated this meeting, Greg Peterson and John Barrett from the Jackson Center, who ventilated it, the president of this court, Dr. Stefan Franke, as the host of tonight's event, and the staff of both the Palace of Justice and the Documentation Center as those who carried out the real work, competent and reliable as always. And last but not least, I would like to thank Ulrike Seeberger for the translation of Whitney Harris' speech, a fact which we sadly missed to mention on the distributed copies, and I apologize for that. Ladies and gentlemen, don't be afraid, I'm not to start a lengthy prologue. I just want to report an observation which might be worth telling. Whitney Harris and the members of the IMT stood here more than 60 years ago in the midst of a totally ruined city and a devastated country, not only to put those responsible for the Second World War to justice. They also stood here to set up measures after which each single person should be responsible for his doings. They stood here to reawake the conscience for the dignity of the individual and to clear the way into a safer world. As we all know too well, these high goals are still to be reached, as there are wars of aggression and violations of human rights in many, more or less distant parts of the world. However, in this moment, we should remember and acknowledge the fact that at least in our country, we do live in the longest peacetime ever in freedom and safety. My own decent lifetime of nearly 60 years, for example, fits completely into this period, having never been disturbed by war, oppression, or hunger. The members of my generation and those to follow should see this as a value and be grateful for and worth to fight for. Though born in February 1949 in Berlin, I cannot remember a single thing of that time. I think it was cold, and I survived thanks to the milk powder and coal flown into the blockaded city of Berlin by the Western Allies. But Whitney, being only 36 years older, he does remember every single day he spent with the IMT in Nuremberg. There are not many people left to tell the story of those days themselves. In future, it is for us to take on this task, which in this case the city of Nuremberg is going to do with the Memorial Nuremberg Trials, due to be opened in 2010 in this building. We will try to fulfill the obligation of reporting truly how history took place here with the Nuremberg Trials. But today, ladies and gentlemen, today is different. Whitney Harris is here as the last of the attorneys who stood in this court representing the prosecution of the IMT. So finally, I want to thank himself that he agreed his pre-Christmas visit to Nuremberg to be turned into a lecture tour. However, we all knew that he would agree. For us, he represents a mission which Hans Saal, a Jewish writer and journalist born in 1902, put down in a short poem in 1973, which I may quote in my own, which means quite free translation. We are the last ones. Question us. We carry the slipbox containing the warrants of our friends with us like a hawker's tread. Institutes are keen to investigate the evidence of those who are missing. Museums preserve the keywords of our agony like relics under glass. Our fate is due to conservation. Our best client is the guilty conscience of posterity. Take your chance, help yourself. We are the last ones. Question us. We are responsible. Thank you.
Tonight's event, Mr. Whitney Harris. I don't think I have to make much words on his biography, as you all know him. You also realize that this is a very historic moment. You are in the very room where the Nuremberg trial took place from 1945 to 46. And you see the room which will always be remembered for two things. First of all, for the most heinous atrocities that took place on this planet. And second, for a start of a new world order, for a start of international criminal law with personal and individual responsibility for international crimes. Now, Whitney Harris, as the surviving prosecutor of those times, is here with us tonight to remember us, to remind us of these two things, these most heinous atrocities, and that these atrocities cannot be left unanswered by a global justice system, by the conscience of the world community. Whitney Harris stood here as a young lawyer and was confronted with people like Ernst Kaltenbrunner, the prosecution against him, he represented himself, and people like Göring or Rudolf Höss, the commander of Auschwitz. Those of us who are of a much younger generation, as myself, we can only imagine what it must have been to confront these people and to extract from them the truth of having gassed 2.5 million Jews and other members of minorities. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Whitney Harris.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can't tell you the feelings that are within me tonight as I stand at this podium in the very room where we tried the major German war criminals at the end of World War II. Now, this was the judge's bench, as you can imagine. Over here, the witness stand. Our tables were back there. The Russian, American, British, and French tables where the trial lawyers sat at their places. Back in this area, that wall was gone. That area back there was for guests and visitors, and there were plenty who came during the course of the trial. It is a wonderful feeling and a sad feeling for me to stand here tonight and think again of those momentous events. And also today we went to the
Documentation Center.
Huh?
The Documentation Center.
Yeah, the documentation center. What a tribute to the people of Nuremberg. What a wonderful thing to do, to record for the ordinary people of our city, of this great city, of the events of Nuremberg as they have done in the document center. And, you know, I was tremendously impressed also with one factor. They had a picture there of Adolf Hitler climbing the stairs, you know, looking this way at the party, at a party rally and so forth. And I suddenly remembered that picture is on the cover of my book, Tyranny on Trial, which I wrote published in 1954. And these things, you know, they affect me. And by the way, my dear friend Christoph, he handed me this book tonight. He handed me this book. This is the translation into German of Tyranny on Trial. And I'm so grateful to the fact that now we have this record of history in English and in German. Of course, there are many other books, many of them far superior to anything that I have ever written. But the whole experience is one that you can hardly imagine unless you have lived as long as I have. Now, you know, in all of history, the 20th century, and particularly the first half of that 100 years, witnessed the gravest inhumanity. The first half of the last century. It is hard to believe that the long road of civilization which man has trod since the dawn of history could have led to the dreadful conflicts of World War I from 1914 to 1918 and of World War II from 1939 to 1945. The tragedies of these wars passed from the battlefields of Verdun, where thousands of soldiers died in miserable, muddy trenches under unremitting rifle and cannon fire, to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where hundreds of thousands of civilians were pulverized by atom bombs. I have been there. I have been to Hiroshima. Matter of fact, I made a speech there one time. And just the realization that a whole city and its inhabitants can be destroyed by one bomb dropped from an enemy plane. Stop to think. Civilization now is hanging by threads. It's hanging by threads. There must be an end to war, or there will be an end to civilization. You know, the great trial of 1945-46, held in this room 600 of the Palace of Justice in Nuremberg, Germany, was man's first effort to put tyranny on trial. More than half a century has passed since the Nuremberg trial at the end of World War II, the most devastating of all the wars of ancient or modern history. On October 30, 1943, in the course of that war, President Franklin Roosevelt, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Premier Joseph Stalin stated in the Moscow Declaration that Germans will be held individually responsible for crimes committed by them in the course of the war. The leaders declared that at the time of the granting of any armistice, those officers and men and members of the Nazi Party who were responsible for or took a consenting part in atrocities, massacres, or executions would be sent back to the countries in which their deeds had been committed in order that they might be judged and punished according to the laws of the liberated countries, and that others whose offenses had no particular geographical location would be punished by joint decision of the Allies. The statement concluded, most assuredly, the three Allied powers will pursue them to the uttermost ends of the earth and will deliver them to their accusers in order that justice may be done. Germany, unable to match the military strength of its opponents, surrendered to the Allies on May 7, 1945. 5 days earlier, United States President Harry Truman had formally designated Supreme Court Justice Robert H. Jackson as the representative of the United States in drafting a protocol for the trial of the leading Nazis and as its chief of counsel in preparing and prosecuting charges against them before an international military tribunal. On his first visit to London in that capacity, shortly after his appointment, Justice Jackson received the assurance of Lord Chancellor Simon that the British government would support an international military trial of the major alleged German war criminals. Representatives of the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union met in London on June 26, 1945, for the purpose of drafting a covenant for the trial of the major alleged German war criminals. Agreement was reached on the establishment of an international military tribunal composed of 4 members representing Great Britain, the United States, France, and the Soviet Union. An indictment was drafted charging the commission of crimes against peace, that is, aggressive war crimes, crimes in the course committed in the course of the war, and crimes against humanity, and a conspiracy to commit these crimes. An agreement having been reached on the determination to hold this trial, a decision had to be reached on where will it be held? Where will we hold the trial? The Soviets strongly urged Berlin, which seemed a logical choice as the former capital of Germany. Justice Jackson conferred with the United States Commissioner for Germany, General Lucius Clay, who suggested as a possible alternative the historic city of Nuremberg. Despite severe damage which it had sustained by Allied shelling in the last years of the war, Justice Jackson visited Nuremberg and examined this great palace of justice. Although heavily damaged in the last hours of the war, he found that it had substantial advantages, including this courtroom, which could be enlarged to suit the needs of the 4 judges and their alternates who sat here, of course, the 24 defendants and their counsel who sat, where did they sit? They sat over here, and the prosecuting attorneys, witnesses, interpreters, and so forth. The attorneys sat at 4 tables back there, and there were aides who had their desks in front of the bench here and so forth. This courtroom was really full of participants. Moreover, the wall which separated this room 600 from an adjoining room at back there could be removed to provide additional space for visitors. And there were a lot of people who wanted to come, of course, and witness what we were doing in room 600. The prison facilities in the basement and lower area were more than adequate to provide for the detention of the defendants and the use of prison personnel. I think that the fact that we had that space downstairs was the really culminating factor in the selection of Nuremberg for the trial. A more serious problem was the lack of adequate communication facilities. The trial had to be conducted in the languages of the defendants and the prosecuting powers. Witnesses would be called who spoke other languages. All testimony had to be translated into the 4 principal languages of the trial. This demanding problem was solved by the use in court of translators. Marvelously skilled persons who instantaneously translated the words of the witness on the box into a language which then was transmitted through telephonic cable provided by the American facilities to all of the persons in the courtroom through headphones. So you could dial whatever language you wanted to hear the testimony. The witness testified in Russian. Well, too bad I don't speak Russian, but I do understand a little English, so I put my dial to English. And so that's the way that the the proceedings were able to go forward in reasonable time. The city of Nuremberg, in 1945 was in ruins. The patient pigments flowed its way through stone and rubble. Fallen brick facades of buildings blocked many passageways. I saw women fill iron carts with bricks and rubble and push them down openings in the blockaded streets. Only the front facade remained standing miraculously of the Frauenkirche. Germany was in ruins, its people in despair, and this aura of gloom, the trial of the alleged major German war criminals of World War II, proceeded in the once beautiful palace of justice in the noble medieval city of Nuremberg. We are gathered here tonight to declare the establishment of the principles of law which were developed by the International Military Tribunal in this very room, and to acknowledge the contribution of the judges and trial counsel, prosecutors and lawyers for the defense, whose dedication to the cause of justice ended in a judgment condemning aggressive war crimes, and crimes against humanity committed in war, and criminalizing the conduct of leaders of nations responsible for these crimes. Now, the genesis of the Nuremberg trial was the Moscow Conference of October 1943, at the conclusion of which a statement was issued by President Roosevelt, Prime Minister Churchill, and Premier Stalin, declaring the determination of the three powers to hold Germans individually responsible for crimes committed by them in the course of World War II. The statement warned that at the time of any armistice to any German government, those German officers and men and members of the Nazi Party who were responsible for or took a consenting part in atrocities, massacres, or executions would be sent back to the countries in which their deeds had been committed, in order that they might be judged and punished according to the laws of the liberated countries, and that those whose crimes encompassed more than one country would be tried by decision of the Allies. The International Military Tribunal was established to bring to justice those leaders of Nazi Germany. The tribunal consisted of 4 judges and their alternates who sat here at this bench. The presiding judge was Lord Justice Lawrence of Great Britain. Other judges were Mr. Francis Fiddle of the United States, Professor Donadou Defarge of France, and General I.T. Dekochenko of the Soviet Union. The chief prosecutors were Justice Robert H. Jackson of the United States, Sir Hartley Shawcross of Great Britain, General R.A. Rudenko of the Soviet Union, and Monsieur Francois de Menthon of France. The final draft of the indictment was signed by the chief prosecutors in Berlin on October 6, 1945. I served as an officer in the United States Navy throughout World War II. Toward the end of the war, I was assigned for special duty with the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, and was put in charge of the investigation of war crimes in the European theater. While on this assignment, I came in contact with the small European staff which had been assembled by Justice Jackson in London. I was invited to join the prosecution team and transferred to Nuremberg in August 1945. The trial began on November 20, 1945, with the reading of the indictment. The next morning, the 20 defendants then present in court entered pleas of not guilty. There followed one of the foremost forensic speeches in legal history, the opening statement for the United States, eloquently delivered by Mr. Justice Jackson. He said, and many of you have heard these words before, but I shall repeat them. He said, the privilege of opening the first trial in history for crimes against the peace of the world imposes a grave responsibility. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated. That 4 great nations, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stay the hand of vengeance and voluntarily submit their captive enemies to the judgment of the law is one of the most significant tributes that power has ever paid to reason. Justice Jackson declared that what the defendant stood for would be patiently and temperately disclosed. We will give you undeniable proofs of incredible events. And he described the crimes of the Hitler regime as the fruits of the sinister forces that sit with these defendants in the prisoner's dock. He acknowledged the problem of credibility posed by the trial of the accused before an ad hoc tribunal of the victors. Unfortunately, he observed, the nature of these crimes is such that both prosecution and judgment must be by victor nations over vanquished foes. The worldwide scope of the aggressions carried out by these men has left but few neutrals. Either the victors must judge the vanquished, or we must leave the defeated to judge themselves. After referring to the failure of the latter course at the end of World War I, he counseled, we must never forget that the record on which we judge these defendants today is the record on which history will judge us tomorrow. To pass these defendants a poisoned chalice is to put it to our own lips as well. We must summon such detachment and intellectual integrity to our task that this trial will commend itself to posterity as fulfilling humanity's aspirations to do justice. Justice Jackson did not contend that judicial remedies alone could prevent future wars, but he urged the importance of holding statesmen accountable to the law. And let me make clear, he added, that while this law is first applied against German aggressors, the law includes, and if it is to serve a useful purpose, it must condemn aggression by any other nations, including those which sit here now in judgment. The most dramatic, to my mind, was a 3-minute exchange between the witness Otto Ohlendorf, the chief of Einsatzgruppe D, and who's the one who I said confessed to me the killing of 93,000 people, and the Soviet judge, General Nuremberg, who sat over here. This was the interchange in open court. Now think about this. Think about this. Question. In your testimony, you said that the Einsatzgruppen had the object of annihilating the Jews and the commissars. Is that correct? Answer. Yes. Question. And in what category did you consider the children? For what reason were the children massacred? Answer. The order was that the Jewish population should be totally exterminated. Question, including children? Answer, yes. Question, were all the Jewish children murdered? Answer, yes. In this brief exchange between the Soviet judge and the witness Ollendorf, the consummate evil of the Hitler tyranny was exposed. "22 defendants were convicted by the Tribunal. 3 were acquitted. I was the only prosecutor. I was, of course, in this courtroom when the Tribunal read its final opinion and when the sentences were imposed upon the defendants. I will remember Hermann Goering entering through that door there and standing in attention while Judge Lawrence, who was here, was about to read his sentence, and he had headphones, and he held up his hands. These headphones don't work, so they had to replace the headphones for Goering and put on another set of headphones. After which Judge Lawrence read the sentence declaring Hermann Goering guilty as charged and sentenced to die by hanging. I was the only prosecutor to be present in this Palace of Justice on the night of the execution. By the way, all of those convicted, the 11, who were convicted and sentenced to die by hanging, were here at the moment that the executions were to be called, and in this Palace of Justice, down below, of course. It was 11 minutes. Well, though I was assigned by Justice Jackson to be present here at the executions, I was not allowed into the execution chamber itself. But I was in this Palace of Justice. I was the only one of the prosecutors present in this most dramatic evening of my life. It was at 11 minutes past 1 o'clock on the morning of October 16, 1946, when the white-faced former foreign minister Joachim von Ribbentrop stepped through the door into the execution chamber, which had been constructed in the basement of this Palace of Justice, and faced the gallows on which he and the others condemned to die by the Tribunal were to be hanged. His hands were unmanacled and bound behind him with a leather thong. Ribbentrop walked to the foot of the 13 steps leading to the gallows platform. He was asked to state his name and answered, Joachim von Ribbentrop. Flanked by 2 guards and followed by the chaplain, he slowly mounted the stairs. On the platform, he saw the hangman with a noose of 13 coils and the hangman's assistant with the black hood. He stood on the track, and his feet were bound with a wet army belt. Asked to state any last words, he said, God protect Germany. God have mercy on my soul. My last wish is that German unity be maintained, that understanding between East and West be realized, and there be peace for the world. The track was sprung, and Ribbentrop died at 1:29. In the same way, each of the remaining defendants who received a capital sentence approached the scaffold and met the fate of common criminals. After the executions, the body of each man was placed upon a simple wooden coffin. The body of Hermann Goering, who had committed suicide of that time, was brought in and placed upon its box, and there to be photographed with the others. In the early morning hours, 2 trucks carrying the 11 caskets left the prison compound at the Palace of Justice, bound for Munich Tribunal. There, during all of that day, the bodies were cremated. It was reported that in the evening, the 11 urns containing the ashes were taken away to be emptied into the river Isar. The dust of the dead was carried along in the currents of the stream to the Danube and thence to the sea. The other 7 who were sentenced to varying terms of imprisonment were brought to Spandau prison in the British sector of Berlin, the only prisoners in a prison built to house 600 inmates. The first to be released was Hitler's successor, Admiral Karl Dönitz, and the last was Rudolf Hess, who managed somehow to commit suicide on August 17, 1987, 41 years after the final judgment of the Tribunal. With his death, the Hitler tyranny ended. In Tyranny on Trial, I concluded the chapter on the judgment of the International Military Tribunal with these words. The tyrant and his chief cohorts were gone. They had sought to achieve greatness in history, but they inscribed their names in sand, and clean waters fell upon the beach and washed them out. They had intended to establish a new order for Europe, but they built upon pillars of hate, and what they stood for could not stand. Hitler had taken the best that was German and that was in Germany and corrected it to his evil purposes. He took the loyalty of the German people and led them into endless, hopeless wars. He took the creativeness of the German mind and set it to devising horrible instruments of mass murder. He took the bravery of youth and commanded them to die upon far and frozen battlefields. He took the nobility of the German spirit and sullied it with wicked persecution. In all this, he was aided and abetted by men eager to share his hours of triumph. They shared, too, his guilty ways and his personal shame. With Hitler they erred, and for their errors they paid a just and deserved penalty. Because they turned from truth, the final result could not have been otherwise. Truth, crushed to earth, shall rise again. The eternal years of God are here. But error, wounded, rise in pain and dies among his worshippers. The tyrant is dead, and gone the evil of his reign. Germany, crushed to earth, shall nobly rise again. Thank you.
how the spirit and the history came back to us and made this trial, which took place in this room, again a little bit of a reality with us here tonight. Nevertheless, Whitney offered to take some questions, so if you have any questions, please step forward and formulate them. He's happy to answer, if he can, he said.
The outstanding person, the outstanding defendant on that issue was Albert Speer. Speer, at all times during the trial, was endeavoring to assess his role in the Nazi regime. You know, he was the one that was the architect for the great buildings that Hitler wanted to build and so forth. And he is the one defendant that I would say, more than any other, who really took an objective viewpoint of his personal participation and recognized the reality of his role in this terrible conspiracy. This was a matter of profound concern with me that the United States might not ratify this treaty. But the United States has a bad reputation in this respect. We have a difficult system of ratifying treaties. It requires a vote of the United States Senate. The President has to sign the bill, then it goes to the Senate, then you debate it and so forth. It took 40 years for the United States to adopt the Genocide Convention. Who could be against genocide? Nobody. But it took us 40 years to sign the Genocide Convention. So, regrettably, the United States has not yet agreed to the Rome Treaty. I was in the Reichstag. In fact, I was the only foreigner, I think, that day in the Reichstag, and certainly the only former Nuremberg prosecutor. And I think I was with Hans-Peter Kahl, too. I think he was one that, yeah, he was. We went with. And when the Reichstag considered the question of whether Germany should become a signatory to the Rome Treaty and to the International Criminal Court, the discussion was very learned and very significant. The result was the vote was unanimous with 2 abstentions. The vote of the Reichstag was unanimous that Germany should become a member of the International Criminal Court. And I remember Hans-Peter Kahl and I went across the street to a little restaurant when it was over, and we toasted each other with a bottle of wine. That this is a truly significant thing, that Germany, after all of this, would be a leader in establishing a system of justice in the world, which would ultimately outlaw these terrible crimes that occurred in the Hitler regime. So I can only speak with deep regret in my heart that the United States of America, the greatest country on this planet, in many respects, has yet failed to ratify this treaty, which has the promise, ultimately, of assuring peace in the world. And all of us who are concerned about this are not going to stop until our country becomes a member of the ICC. Thank you.
Here tonight to hand them over to Whitney Harris, that his 1954 compilation of the Nuremberg evidence of the Nuremberg trials is now available in the German language, thanks to Ms. Seeberger, who translated the book, thanks to the Jackson Center, who financed most of the book, and thanks to the Berliner Wissenschaftliches Verlag who decided to edit the book in this nice format. I have some sheets if you want to order the book. Yes, so that's a wonderful compilation of the evidence at Nuremberg. This is, I think, the best contribution that it does. That this is a summary of the evidence which was forthcoming at Nuremberg, and it has a foreword by Hans-Peter Kaul, the German judge at the ICC, a close friend of Whitney Harris. So you can see that this book is of enormous importance, I think, also to the German people. So the last words for tonight, Whitney. Thank you so much for sharing your experience in Nuremberg at this trial with us here tonight, and all the best of luck for you and your family. And I hope to see you again in this room at some time. Thank you very much.
The end of my life in this great hall, and it's something that this is a night I shall never forget. And it's truly, thank you so much.